Greetings, this is Mischa, and this is going to be a character tutorial for RPG Maker MV, and I think MZ as well. I'm pretty sure what I will say in this video can apply to MZ. In the video description below, I'm going to put a Google Drive link, and that will have all the Photoshop files and the PNG files, just all the template files so you can make your own characters in the style if you'd like. In the second half of the video is going to be a progress update for my game. I'd really like to show it. It's come such a long way since the days of yore of 2019. My goodness, it's been that long. Cool. Without much further ado, let's get into it. My goal for RPG Maker was to go from using these default chibi sprites that you can make using the character generator, where the figure is about 2 heads high, to a 6 head height figure, which is like Baldur's Gate, Fallout, etc, etc. To start from square one, I'm just going to use RPG Maker's character generator and quickly remake the original character that I used for Shivering Hearts. When that's done, I'm going to export their walk cycle, and that will generate a PNG image file that is 576 by 384 pixels. The middle column shows the character in their standing position, and when you walk, the character cycles between the left and right frames. The actual character, if you isolate it, is 144 pixels wide by 192 pixels high, and each of these sprites are 48 by 48 pixels. These default dimensions are fixed, and you can't do anything about that. So, what can we do if we want to make something bigger? RPG Maker allows for custom dimensions when you put a dollar symbol at the start of the file name. If you see this file, I'm going to use $bigmonster1.png as a base. This is one of the default assets. Now this is a walk cycle, but it's hard to tell because all you have are 4 monsters all facing downwards. But it is a walk cycle, surprisingly. I'll show this by replacing the player sprite in my game. Up, down, left, and right. This is in your project files under image and then characters, and it's labeled Big Monster 1. So to analyze this sheet, the dimensions for this particular sprite sheet is 288 pixels wide by 384 pixels high. The dollar symbol simply divides your sheet by 3 vertically and by 4 horizontally. So 288 divided by 3 equals 96, 384 divided by 4 equals 96 as well. So each square in this is 96 by 96 pixels. So that is the most important thing, using a dollar symbol at the start of the file name so you can have custom dimensions. Now that that's done, let's try and make our own sprite. I'm just going to show how I did it for my main player sprite, Sky. This sprite sheet is 360 pixels wide by 480 pixels high, and these dimensions are the same for all my characters, because I wanted each frame of the sprite to be 120 by 120 pixels. Then I multiplied it by 10 to get 3600 by 4800, and then I drew at this scale because it's so much easier. Now, I wanted to use a Baldur's Gate sprite as reference, but I couldn't extract the actual player sprite in a reasonable manner. I know it's possible by using third-party software like Near Infinity or whatever, but instead I was able to get a GIF of the drow female walk cycle, and then I used that as a reference. By uploading the GIF to a website called EasyGIF, I was able to extract all the individual PNG files used in this GIF, and then I chose the frames which I thought would make a good walk cycle, and then I laid them out onto the template sheet. Now I wanted to give a special shout out to the website that was hosting all these amazing files, but it has been suspended unfortunately. But that's fine, I'll just put the drow walk cycle at least onto Google Drive. By using these frames as a guide, I then roughly sketched out the frames that I wanted to draw, and then I worked quite a while to create a more refined template. This is different to how pixel art is done from my knowledge. In pixel art you normally work at the resolution that the final drawing is going to be at, but I found it way too difficult to draw at that scale, so instead I drew at a much larger resolution and then shrunk it down to the 480 by 360. Another thing is I tried to watercolor the sprites first, but there was something not working with this, and I had another 14 more characters to go. These frames took about 3 days and it wasn't really working, I needed way more consistency than what I was getting, so instead I used tablet drawing. But I mean, tablet drawing has so many advantages. Like you can achieve consistency between the frames so much easier than when you're hand drawing. You can use the eyedropper tool to make all the colors the same, or you can overlay sprites on top of each other to check the consistency. This honestly makes life way easier. You can freely transform and flip and duplicate and stretch images however you want, it's super powerful. Once I got these drawings to a level that I was happy at, I arranged them onto the template sprite sheet, flattened the drawings, then I resized it to 360 by 480, then I imported it into the game in the characters folder. A reminder to make sure you have the dollar symbol at the start of the file name. It's very important to consider centering and the alignment of the figures as well. Then go into, say, the character settings, double click here, and select your sprite sheet. Then load it up into your game, and there you go. So honestly, there was a lot of frustration when making this, but it's so worth it when you get it going. Now I'm just going to go into some general tips. At this scale, you're going to lose a lot of detail, especially in the face, so instead I use the character busts during dialogue to convey these characters, kind of like Persona, but a lot of games do this. Having nice thick lines when drawing helps when you shrink it down to the final size. It makes the characters pop against the environment. I use the 4 pixel brush to outline these. But even then, it's not going to show up that well, so when you're shrinking it down, I would say duplicate the layers twice, even 3 times, to really get the outlines to pop. Now I know I can keep going deeper and deeper into the subject. There's plugins to allow for diagonal sprites in the sprite sheet, and then there's plugins to allow for way more frames of animation, but I'm not there yet. I still don't know how to wrap my head around all this. But just to start with, I think this is a really solid base. Just to remind everyone, in the description there's going to be a Google Drive folder, and that will have all my Photoshop and PNG sprite sheets and template drawings, etc. if you'd like to study them. Like, even if you're doing a different style from me like pixel art, I still think it'll be quite helpful as a resource. Phew, wow. That's the technical part of the video out of the way. That took a crap ton of effort, but I hope it helps someone out, even if just a bit. In this part, I wanted to briefly talk about the design process of the character. So for the first 4 months of the development of Shivering Hearts, I used this particular sprite that I made using the inbuilt character generator, which I still recommend using. The character generator is such a great resource, like it just helps you put some ideas onto the screen. Originally, the protagonist was called Mercury, and she used this particular sprite sheet until I changed the design and her name into Sky. The thing is, when I started trying to capture the design in my own style, I liked the design, but I wanted to take things even further and experiment more. Like, the design itself felt a bit too conventional for my tastes. So I just started doodling, nothing specific, I was just opening myself up to ideas. And this is what I came up with. I wanted the protagonist to display self-assuredness, have an androgynous, gender-ambiguous design, and a more modern aesthetic to contrast against the setting, which was a lot more fantasy-leaning. I wanted to have, that early 2000s skater vibe. Something from Newgrounds, like this game, Etherina Beta. Wow, this game is sick. One of the main playable characters in Etherina Beta is Shiri, who to this day I'm still not sure whether it's a guy or a girl. Just some disinterested edgelord that shoots dark energy balls and crows come out of his feet as he slides through the air. It's so sick. Something about this really stuck with me, like, man, it's just not defined by anything, it's just rising above it all. Like, I couldn't give 2 shits about you, like that's the energy I wanted. So that's the main problem I felt when using the default RPG Maker assets as a base. It's a great starting point, but I felt it limited my imagination. Like, I'm sure that's how all RPG Maker users feel. Like, I remember having this conversation back when I was, 11 years old, when I was an intermediate and RPG Maker 98 was installed on one of the school computers. And me and my nerd friends would just spend all of our lunch times and come in early to school just to work on RPG Maker 98 and just shoot ideas off and really try to get something going. Man, those were some good times. I loved that. That was awesome. I still really like the original design. There's still a lot of potential. I want to figure out how to have more frames in the walk cycle. For example, this is Illy from a previous project I was working on in Game Maker Studios, before things weren't really working out and I felt like I had to scrap the project. My main pride and joy from that project was her walk cycle. She had 11 walking frames each and 1 standing frame per direction, and it was honestly so satisfying bringing her to life. So I wanted to achieve a similar flowing dress look for Mercury and her design. Like, that would actually look so sick, honestly. I guess my main point is, you're always going to want to keep tweaking and overhauling or enhancing your character design, so don't take everything you've made as fixed. Be open to change. So to finish off, I'd like to show some progress with the latest build of my game. Holy shit, it's so much better. What I thought would only take a few months instead became an insane overhaul of almost everything. I'll do a brief rundown. The biggest changes are making all the assets at 1080p from the 720p resolution, along with ink penning all the landscapes, the portraits, just improved Photoshop work everywhere. I'll use this cliff landscape as an example. You can see that the striations on the cliff side is a lot more clear, and you can actually make out the grass texture, really appreciating the delineation between the actual cliff edge and the rest of the drawing. Here's another drawing as an example. I had to individually ink pen every single rock in this cobblestone path. Also, I tried to really show each individual flower in this lavender patch, just trying to communicate all the elements in the drawing a lot more clearly. The next one is, it's a lot easier to show this, but originally movement was only constrained to the grid that was in RPG Maker. You can only move up, down, left and right. Now with the magic of plugins, you can move anywhere in any direction. It feels way more liberating and engaging when exploring these spaces. I've added shadows to all the landscapes. It adds so much more depth and believability to the scene. Drawing all the shadows for each individual landscape took a lot of time. Had to draw each individual blade of grass, and I couldn't have hard edges for the shadows when drawing the trees, for example. Like, I had to make the edges a lot softer. I really tried to convey the light penetrating through the gaps of the leaves and all the tree foliage. And even the color of the shadow. Like, shadow itself isn't just about applying a translucent black texture on top of your drawing. Like, even shadow itself has this atmospheric lighting, and you have all these sort of invisible light sources bouncing off the different surfaces in the landscape, and even providing a slight tint of blue or green within the landscape. I really recommend James Gurney's book on color and light. This was really illuminating, literally illuminating at giving me a lot more understanding at how light itself is such a complicated thing to convey in painting. It's a really beautiful book. I recommend it a lot. The next feature I was able to add was parallax scrolling. Parallax scrolling is having multiple drawings move along the X and Y axis at different speeds in relation to your character moving, and that provides the illusion of depth in your landscapes, even though it's just a collection of 2D images. It was crazy figuring this out. I didn't think it was possible in RPG Maker, but you can actually have parallax scrolling. That was such a great thing to discover. Next is having custom environmental collisions. So before, collisions were mapped according to the grid. Again, just to show an example in how my landscapes were previously mapped, each of the black tiles represented where you couldn't move, and you can also see this reflected in the character movement also being locked on that grid. But now, again with the magic of plugins, I can instead have RPG Maker read a separate PNG file, and I can customize exactly how I want the collisions of that landscape to work. So here I marked out in black the areas where your character would collide into. It makes, how do I describe it? It makes things a lot less artificial when traversing the landscape. Like, you're not butting up against hard edges at 90-degree angles. You can really feel the contours of the cliff edge, and this opens things up incredibly so. Like, all my buildings before had to be at 90-degree angles, like very basic designs, because I had to work to that 90-degree limit, working to that grid. But now, since I'm free from that grid, I can potentially make way more outlandish architecture and landscapes, and it just opens a whole new world in what I could represent. Like, this feels so strange, but this is one of the most exciting discoveries that I've found. The next discovery I'm also really happy about. It's adding a lot more animation to the landscapes and really bringing them to life. So I mentioned the previous plugin, Galv's image plugin. It also allows for different layers of your landscape to move and scroll along the X and Y axis at different speeds, and most importantly, they allow for different blending modes. Blending modes is a bit hard to explain, but I'll try to show it visually. So one of the most requested parts on my previous build was people asking me how I could bring a lot more life into the drawing by animating the waterfall or the ocean or other bodies of water. And so just to quickly explain, I would take royalty-free water caustic textures, edit them in a way so that the textures themselves are seamless, and then have multiple of them be at different opacities. Say this one's like at 30% opacity, this one's at 50% opacity, and have them set at either a multiply or a screen blending mode. Maybe I should explain this when I fully do a tutorial on this, but then having 3 or 4 of these layers, then scroll at different speeds and have them intersect and crisscross against each other. The effect itself is so mesmerizing, like it really does give the impression that light itself is penetrating through this large body of water. It's just really beautiful. That same theory of having different textures scroll at different speeds and intersect each other at different blending modes, I also use that to convey fog in the landscape. Like, I love Silent Hill. This exact technique of mastering the different layers and opacities at really conveying a believable fog and making the player feel shrouded and blinded by it. And I could also convey a heavy rainstorm with this same theory. It's way more powerful than I thought it would be. You just gotta get creative. The next part is adding a few more story branches and reactivity to the plot. This one's a bit hard to explain in a video format, making the writing a lot more effective and punchy and a bit less rambly. Like, good writing is constant rewriting, I feel. Next is having name tags for all the characters. This took a lot of time as well. I had to manually go back and add names to all the dialogue and making sure there aren't any discrepancies, and then having a script which detects what name is in that name box and then applying a color to their name to really make it pop. Another really big improvement I feel is giving the player the ability to save and load anywhere in the game by pressing the number 1 to save and pressing number 2 to load. Previously in the original build, you could only save and load at this particular NPC. Like, in hindsight, I thought it'd be interesting because it'll help you develop a relationship with that character. But in practice, it just made the act of navigating through my game and exploring the different choices and the different timelines way more confusing and way more of a hassle than it should be. Like, saving and loading at a particular spot was only relevant for console gaming. PC gaming like Deus Ex or Morrowind or Baldur's Gate or Fallout, there's a reason why you can save at any point and anywhere in the game. I've added a whole new soundtrack now. This was from a collective called Low Gravity Beats that I found on Bandcamp. I'm able to use their soundtrack in a commercial project like this by buying their entire discography. I'll just show some examples. In the previous build, I used music from RPG Maker XP and MV and VX, and even though I altered them a bit, it wasn't the best choice, but I still like the original music. Like, it conveyed the tone that I wanted to in certain scenes. Like, this new music is very mesmerizing. It's eclectic and acoustic, and I never would have imagined having this sort of music. Next is cleaning up the UI a lot and adding a watercolor texture for all the dialogue. This replaces the default assets and makes things so much more readable and ties everything together a lot more seamlessly. I really like how it looks. So yeah, those are the main improvements that I can think of right now. I'm sure there's a bunch of others. The main things I need to do now definitely is bug fixes and proofreading. This clip is the best way I can describe it. Cool, thanks for watching and listening. I'm gonna plow ahead and do all the bug fixing and proofreading and making sure everything's working alright. Super grateful at all the comments and the views so far. You all are great. Once I upload the new version of my game and making sure that there are any bugs whatsoever, I'm going to then focus on YouTube and create tutorials on everything that you've seen so far and really delve deep in how you can achieve this for your own projects if you're interested. So thanks for your patience, y'all. Take care and see you in the next one.